Good evening, everybody. Those of you in the back of the room, hopefully you can hear me. I'll be really quick. My name is Nick Atsos. I'm the Precinct 4 Town Councilor. This is the second such meeting we've had to discuss Main Street and making improvements there. The last one was last year, and I believe it was via Zoom. So it's nice we can all get together tonight in person and discuss things. As you can see, we have things set up a little bit differently. It's not going to be just Griffin and Officer Perry getting up here and just talking to you all night. It'll be interactive. You have some opportunities to go around with different photographs back there and make some suggestions and be heard. So again, it's not going to just be us up here talking. I know I'm going to be I'll just finish talking shortly after this, and I'll be turning it over to Griffin. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for taking time out of your evening. We finally have a nice, beautiful spring night to enjoy, but thank you all for being inside and listening to what's going to happen tonight. Looking forward to hearing from everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Thank everybody for coming. This is a great turnout. Look forward to the conversation tonight. I'm Griffin Bowden. I'm the town engineer for the town of Barnstable. Again, thank you, Councilor. We have a number of folks here from the town as well. They're going to help facilitate discussion later in the evening. First, I'm going to give about a half-hour presentation to try to explain the why are we here having this conversation, and then really start to facilitate some of the concerns that we see from a technical perspective along the Main Street corridor, and then some of the other areas that are impacted by utility work, planned utility work. So I'm going to go through the presentation, and then we'll have kind of a workshop in the back where we can have direct conversations about certain areas and everything like that. So that's what we're planning on for this evening. A couple housekeeping items. We are being recorded this evening, be posted on Channel 18 and on the website at a later date. And if you need the bathroom, it's right out the hallway. It's going to be over on your right, second right. So there's a women's and men's room right there. All right, so what are tonight's objectives? We're looking to identify anticipated impacts of the planned utility projects in the village to kind of set the groundwork for why we're having this conversation. We'll identify and discuss the concerns within the existing roadway corridors in the various areas where we see technical issues. Brainstorm potential corridor improvements to see what does the corridor look like after a utility project. How do we want the village to look like moving forward? We view this as kind of a community-based discussion. We're all town staff. We live in the community. We're interested in the community as well. You obviously all do as well. So we want to have a community-based conversation here tonight and try to really focus on what is Main Street and other areas in the village going to look like after this construction happens. A couple things we're just going to stay away from tonight for in order to kind of make sure we stay on track with conversation. Obviously, we're going to talk a bit about Park City Wind because that's driving a lot of the conversation we're having. But I'm not really here tonight to debate the Park City Wind routes, right? There's been debates about that. There's been decisions made by Avangrid, and that's why we're having conversations about the routes we're talking about, and we'll go through those in a minute. Also, don't really want to get into Park City Wind's financial status or project status or anything like that. Frankly, I don't know all the internal details. My understanding is there's a lot of speculation in the media. My understanding is they're on track to start construction in 2024, the fall of 2024. That's what they're telling us. So we're prepping to start construction in advance of that, right? So those are the kind of assumptions we're operating under tonight when we're having this conversation. So I appreciate if we can just stay within those assumptions. All right, quick overview. Again, I'm going to basically go through what's the overview of the utility projects, really to kind of let everybody know what's planned and what the impacts will be, and really why we're having conversations about restoration, right? Then we'll spend some time looking at certain sections of roadway and the corridors to identify the issues that we see, both from a motorist perspective and a pedestrian perspective and an aesthetic perspective, right? And then we're going to break out into a workshop. Saw all the poster boards and everybody kind of went around and mingled. We're going to kind of do that again, get some input from everybody on what you're thinking, what areas you're concerned with, what areas you think are great, what things you want to see enhanced, what you would like to see there, etc. We're going to use all that data, collect all that data, and go back and start some design efforts, and then we'll be back with another conversation when we've advanced design and we're ready to collect some more feedback. We do also have a questionnaire in the back. We would appreciate if folks are interested to fill out the questionnaire and provide some written input. We'll be taking notes during the workshop session, but if you want to fill out the questionnaire, certainly would appreciate that. And also, there's a sign-in sheet. If you want to provide your contact information, we'll have a project email list that we'll be putting together to allow updates to people and keep people informed as to progress, etc., or future meetings and stuff like that. All right, so the Park City Wind Project. So the Park City Wind Project, for those who don't know about it, just quick overview, it's a proposed offshore wind project south of Martha's Vineyard. It's proposed to come on shore at Craigville Beach and utilize the parking lot for the landing of electric cables below the parking lot, and then there's a proposed route by which they would follow roadways with electrical equipment in order to get to the substations that are up in West Barnstable. So what we have here is the proposed route. Just to orient you, Craigville Beach is on that side, north is this way, this is Route 6. So the proposed route is what's in yellow. Avangrid has selected this route for the proposed project and is continuing to pursue permits for that project, and that's where we're designing sewer in coordination with that, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So we got Craigville Beach, coming up Craigville Beach Road. Oops. All right. Let me fix this. There we go. All right, coming up Craigville Beach Road, crossing South Main Street at kind of the Four Seas intersection, right, and then advancing through the village, taking the slight left up Old Stage, crossing Route 28, continuing up Old Stage, taking a right onto Shoot Flying Hill Road and advancing up Shoot Flying Hill Road to the current site of the Knights Inn up off of Service Road, where they are proposing to install a new substation where the power will come into. They then will be boring under Route 6 to connect to the actual larger substation to put power back into the grid. So that's the proposed project route for Park City Wind. So similar to the Vineyard Wind sewer expansion, or Vineyard Wind project, which is ongoing right now and getting close to completion of construction, the town will be prioritizing sewer expansion along the route for a couple of reasons. One, there's technical coordination issues that need to be worked through. We'll talk about that in a little bit, and we'll show some figures. But there's also cost savings and limiting time of disruption by being able to coordinate projects with developers such as this. Ultimately, the wind developer is going to be required to pave all the roads at the end, so that saves the town quite a bit of money on the end of these projects, because at the end of the sewer project, otherwise we would have to pave it. So just quick overview of this project. The area in purple are actually the areas we'll be sewering as part of the this specific project in coordination with the Park City Wind project. So it's the route we just talked about. There's also a spur here up Main Street heading up Finney's Lane towards 28 in the Mothers Park area. That needs to be done as part of this because ultimately the sewer system can't function without that leg of the sewer being installed. So that'll be done as part of this effort. Quick overview, it's 5 miles of new sewers that'll be installed as part of the project, 6 new sewer pump stations. It's about 350 properties along that route that'll be connected at the end of the project. It's being designed in coordination with Park City Wind. We actually anticipate the construction funding to be appropriated as part of the upcoming fiscal year capital budget. It's about a $30 million sewer expansion project, large project. We're expecting to start construction in the spring of 24. Reason for that is we're trying to advance construction prior to the Park City Wind project commencing in order to kind of stay out ahead of them and be able to properly coordinate work. We're expecting it to be about a 2-year construction project. And it's going to remove about 6.6 kilograms per day of nitrogen from the Centerville River watershed, which at the end of the day is the reason we're doing the comprehensive wastewater management plan. So that's a good thing. Talking about construction impacts, if you were at the presentation I held a couple weeks ago, you'll remember this slide. But basically the sewer and duct bank construction projects are both major infrastructure projects. The sewer construction is a major effort, requires deep excavations, 10 to 15 feet deep, in some places up to 25 feet deep, though that's minimized on this project through our design effort. Duct bank construction requires wide construction, large construction zones, a lot of equipment, etc. And they have to install vaults approximately every 1,500 feet, which are about 9 feet wide and about 30 feet long. So these big vaults that require cranes to come in to put them in. That has to happen about every 1,500 feet in order to be able to pull the cable at the end of the project. So I'll show some pictures of those in a little bit, but those are big efforts. There are multiple contractors that have to be coordinated along the route. So that's something that we spend a lot of time doing, back in our office, making sure that contractors are speaking to each other and coordinating efforts to the extent possible and trying to minimize coordination issues. Trenching will occur within, as you can see here, large portions of the roadway, portions of the shoulders, portions of the sidewalks. So there's a lot of construction ongoing. We have to coordinate road closures. As you can see, this is a big hole. There's a dump truck taking up the other lane. It's not safe for cars and motorists and pedestrians to be in the work zone. So we established detours. You're all familiar with those after the Strawberry Hill project. But that's something that's necessary to keep the public safe, right? We do have to trim trees, specifically above the roadway, in order to get equipment in. Some of the equipment's pretty tall. As you can see this excavator, right? It's about a 30-foot high when they move the boom. So if there's branches, we may need to trim them. We coordinate that with the town's tree warden, who is here tonight, Andy Bernier. Will be involved. We'll be here for the workshop later on. Selective removal of trees may be necessary. That will be determined as we proceed through design, but there will need to be some selective removal of trees we're expecting. Construction comes with noise and vibrations. It's something that's really unavoidable, but we do everything we can to mitigate that, specifically in areas where there are sensitive receptors, such as historic houses and stuff like that. So we're doing a lot of thinking about that and trying to figure out the best way to advance that effort, right? There's fences, landscaping, people's mailboxes, driveway aprons, stuff like that that need to be disrupted in order to do the work. We restore that at the end, but there are some temporary changes that need to happen to stuff that may be within the public right of way, actually the town property, but people always kind of creep out a little bit, right? And then potential utility disruptions. When you do a lot of digging, you can hit things that requires a water shut off for a short period of time or a gas shut off for a short period of time in order to fix something that was unintended or something that may have been intended. And so we deal with that as well. So what does the coordination with the wind developer look like, right? So a common misconception that I've heard through a number of these conversations is that the sewer and the duct bank all go in at the same time in the same trench. It's one hole and we're done. Unfortunately, that's not the case, right? There are a number of different contracts. We have a private wind developer who's installing a duct bank, and we have the town who is installing a sewer. They're not installing the sewer for us. The town is doing that. It's with public dollars, therefore we need to publicly bid it. So we can't just select a contractor kind of like they can, frankly. So we have to go through a public procurement process. So there are inevitably multiple contractors. It's a different type of work too. So the duct bank construction is very specialized. The sewer construction is a different type of construction due to depths. So you have different types of crews as well. So there ends up being, there are multiple efforts in any particular section of roadway. So the general sequence of work, and we'll show pictures of all of them right after, is that we prepare the area, right? We go out, we mark all the utilities. We do any tree trimming we need to do. There's some survey work to set control, and then you start seeing equipment show up, right? and we start digging. Sewer goes first because it's the deepest. So if there's any utilities that are found in the way of where the sewer is going, we have to remove them or relocate them in advance. And then the sewer main goes in. Dig the hole down to the elevation it needs to go, lay the pipe, backfill. That's about 20 to 100 feet a day is what we get of production, and that's just typical of sewer construction. It's relatively slow because of the depths. Then sewer laterals get installed. So the contractor comes back after the mains are installed, reopens up the mains, and installs the laterals to each of the houses, which is where eventually the homeowner will be connecting, right? And then there's testing. So the testing companies that come out that have to do a variety of tests to make sure that the sewer is installed appropriately. So after that, the sewer construction is done, right? But then the duct bank construction starts. There may be some utility relocations that need to be done in advance of the duct bank. For instance, on the Vineyard Wind project, prior to the duct bank construction starting, water main was relocated because it was in the location that the duct bank was going to be installed. We may be seeing something similar on this project, and I'll show you that in a couple minutes. But then once that's all done and the area has been prepped, the duct bank construction advances. They have the vaults that I talked about that have to be installed, and then they install the duct banks. They test the duct banks, and then they come back and they pull cable through the duct banks because that's ultimately what they need to and get the power to go to the substation. Then we start talking about restoration and improvements, right? That's what we're here to talk about tonight, is that last piece, how we put it back together at the end. So that's why there's a whole bunch of stars next to it, because that's what we're talking about tonight, right? So just going through, this is some pictures of tree trimming. Any tree trimming within the public right-of-way gets coordinated with the tree warden. Make sure that if a tree is going to be remaining after the fact, that it can handle the trimming that's going to happen, and that the trimming is done in an appropriate manner and not just somebody comes with an excavator and starts knocking tree limbs down and eventually kills the tree, right? So we do it in a systematic manner to make sure the trees can handle what we're doing. Sewer constructions. We already showed some pictures. There's some additional pictures of what that looks like, right? Ultimately, we end up closing the roadways as a result because it's just not safe for folks to be in here. And then once we're done with the sewer construction, we temporarily pave. So every Friday, we pave the trenches that were done throughout the week, typically. That is what we have in our contracts, and at the end of each day, it's all backfilled and gravel's laid down so that there is a base to drive on. It's a drivable surface at the end of the day. If there's rain events, the contractor is responsible for coming out and fixing any potholes or puddles or anything that develops during this. They're contractually required to deal with that. But ultimately, on Friday, this is what the road looks like at the end for the weekend. And then we talked about the duct bank construction. On the left of those pole vaults, I talked about big concrete vaults that have to have a crane to come in to put in. Fortunately, there's only a handful of them along the route, about every 1,500 feet along the route or so. And then this is what the duct bank construction looks like. They install about 100 to 200 feet of duct bank a day. So they basically dig a 100-foot hole that's about 6 feet wide and about 6 feet deep, install the trench boxes, they install a bunch of piping in there and an arrangement that how it needs to be arranged. They backfill it with a bunch of concrete, so it's encased in concrete, and that's what's called a duct bank. And then they backfill ultimately all the way up and put the road back together. Then they come out after the road's all back together and they pull the cable through the duct bank. So this was that operation down on Craigsville Beach Road earlier this year. Cables are huge, for cables anyway. They're 3-4 inch in diameter. So that's why you got that big hose reel, because to pull the amount of length of cable, about 1,500 feet between each of the vaults, they need that size. So they end up being oversized loads. So to get the reels to the locations, we need, escorts and stuff like that. Many times we have to close the road to do this as well. And then you have final paving and then restoration, right? This is just final paving, obviously, but then there's also restoration, and that's really what we want to talk about tonight. It's an area that we're all familiar with, Main Street, Centerville, right? So when I'm talking about the Main Street corridor tonight, I'm basically talking about the area from South Main Street to Old Stage, which is the section that's along the Park City Wind Route. Yes, there is the spur of Main Street that kind of goes up to Mother's Park that sewer will be installed in as well. Certainly on the table for conversation, but when I'm talking about the corridor, this is kind of what I'm focused on for tonight, just for reference. So for perspective, north is this way, Pregwell Beach would be heading in this direction, Four Seas intersection, Old Stage intersection. So just an overview of the corridor. We have a station set up. We want to collect some information from folks as to what you all see as concerns, what you'd like to see improved perhaps, what you'd like to see remain, what you don't want to see, right? So some of the, just going over anticipated construction impacts specifically for the Main Street corridor, because we've had a lot of conversation about this, right? So a lot of the things we talked about apply here, but we want to specifically kind of go through each of them. So there's some trimming of trees, right? We have to trim above the roadway. Trenching will occur really throughout the roadway, and potentially into the shoulder and potentially into the sidewalks. Obviously temporary paving, we talked about that. Every property has to have a sewer lateral. So, if you average the frontage in the area, there's about 100, 150 feet or so is a new property, roughly. In some areas it's tighter than that. But every one of them, we need to put a pipe from the middle of the road, roughly the middle of the road, to the property line. So it'll cross the sidewalks, right? So there's a trench line to go across the sidewalks. Water main relocation. So I alluded to this a little earlier, and we have some pictures, I think, on the next slide. But as we're looking at the congested corridor that will go together, it really looks as though the water main will need to be relocated. And frankly, it's old. It probably should be relocated anyway. In conversations with ComWater, it ultimately is going to need to be upgraded at some point. So this is probably the rational time to do that. And frankly, given all the work that's going on, and you'll see horizontally, there's really just not enough space to do everything without relocating it. So we're expecting this will happen, though that decision has not been made yet. And we expect that if it is relocated, it will probably end up in the western sidewalk. So if you're heading southbound, it would be the sidewalk on your passenger side. Street tree impacts, we anticipate there will be some removals. To what extent, we don't know yet. We have done surveys of the street trees. We have a poster back there that actually shows the survey. Some of them are healthy, some of them are frankly not. So to the extent we can, we're going to prioritize trying to keep healthy trees. And if there are unhealthy trees that can't be saved, those are the ones that probably will eventually may have to come out, and there'll be a restoration effort after the fact. Not just going to take trees and walk away, right? They have to be replaced. Obviously detours and detours we talked about, and then there'll be vibrations. A lot of conversation about vibrations and foundation concerns, right? We're spending a lot of time thinking about this. Going to come up with a good spec that'll be in our project to try to minimize risk. Ultimately, construction is a contact sport, right? So there's only so much we can do, but we're prioritizing efforts to make sure we minimize this risk. We have no interest in seeing foundations fail, right? Busy figure here, but let me walk through it. The red line is basically the edge of the right-of-way. It's the town-owned property that the road sits in. So that's the area that we have to work within. This orange area, orange line here and here, that's the paved roadway, just for reference. So there is shoulder that the town owns and sidewalk outside of there. In yellow is the existing gas main. So that's a limitation and a design consideration when we're designing these type of projects. And then in blue is the existing water line. And just for reference, this is just north of South Main Street. So South Main Street, the intersection would be right here. So in gray is where the duct bank is proposed to be installed. It would be installed in basically the southbound lane. That's pretty much the case throughout the whole corridor. And then the sewer infrastructure is proposed to be installed in the northbound lane. That's pretty much the case throughout the whole corridor. In doing so, you see we're relatively close to that water main. Most likely in this section where that's going to need to be replaced, just because it's too close to the duct bank for technical reasons, but also constructability reasons. And again, it's old and frankly should be replaced at some point anyway. Similarly, this is the rec building property, just for reference. Same concept. sewer in the northbound lane, duck bank in the southbound lane. You'll see here there's a little bit more separation from that blue line. Maybe an area we might be able to keep water main if we decide it doesn't need to be replaced from a technical perspective. But that's something that we're working through as part of the design. But again, if it has to be relocated, it would end up in probably under the sidewalk, because that's really the only location, as you can see in here, that there's a decent amount of room to actually install a new utility. All right, so I said we've made some observations of the Main Street corridor. And if you attended the conversation I hosted via Zoom maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, these are pretty similar. We've also expanded on them a little bit. So the top bullet, the existing sidewalks don't meet the American with Disabilities Act compliance throughout most of the corridor. Certain sections do. There's some of it that does, but for the most part, it generally doesn't. They're too narrow in a lot of cases. In a lot of locations, they're failing, as we're all aware of, right? There are no curb ramps. There are horizontal obstructions that kind of narrow it in certain pinch points. And in some cases, they're frankly unsafe. I have a picture and a handful of slides that will show one particular location where I almost broke my ankle walking down it. Unsafe mid-block crossings. So all the crosswalks, there's 4, as Chuck reminded me, right? They're all mid-block. So what does mid-block mean? It's not at an intersection. It's in the middle as you're driving along, there's a crosswalk that comes up out of nowhere. That's an unsafe environment to enter the roadway, especially on a main road. But there are things you can do to make that safer. But on Main Street, Centerville specifically, many of them are in random locations. They're on curves, which mean there's less sight distance, so there's more of a risk that once you enter the roadway that people don't see you. They're not visible. They're just the 2 horizontal bars. They're not the ladder style that we've kind of standardized on in town, which are an accepted visible type of crosswalk. There's other ways to make crosswalks more visible. We've seen these in other areas in town where we have brick inlays and stuff like that. So there's options to make things more visible. And at the end of the day, again, they're not ADA compliant. There's no curb ramps, which are required under federal law when we have this type of infrastructure. So those are two biggies. And then the street trees, obviously very scenic, right? But there are roots that are causing the sidewalks to fail. So if you walk down, everybody's seen them, they're causing the sidewalks to heave. They're also too close to the road. They're ultimately a horizontal hazard to motorists because they're literally a foot off the edge of the road in some cases less. So they get hit every once in a while. And frankly, they shouldn't be that close to the roadway. When you design a roadway today, you don't put them that close. That's also resulting in some of the diminishing health that we're seeing in some of them, right? We'll show some pictures of some of the trees, but the fact that they're directly adjacent to a roadway and not getting water because it's an impervious surface that doesn't allow water to drain through it is causing the street trees to be stressed. And that's why you're seeing the roots heave on the backside because they're really trying to seek air and water, and that's the only place where they can do that. They can't do it under the road. So street trees are a big one, right? Big consideration here. There's some on-street parking conflicts throughout the corridor where there may or may not be formalized on-street parking, and it may be unclear where a pedestrian should be going when they're crossing this area, right? Have a good picture, we'll go through that in a minute. Aging infrastructure, we talked about the water, it's getting old. There's drainage that probably needs to be upgraded. The pavement's not necessarily in the best condition, so that's all stuff that would be addressed as part of a project like this. Plenty of reports of speeding, right? So we've done some speed studies, we have some data. We don't have as much data as we need on this, right? But obviously there are design considerations that can help mitigate speeding. We'll talk about some of those. Intersection safety. So we got the intersection at the top that we talked about, right? To the north, the old stage intersection, I'll call it. And then we have the one at South Main Street, we'll call it the 4 Cs intersection, because that's fun. You know, obviously there are improvements that can be made at both of those intersections. We have some ideas there. Welcome, plenty more. Another one that we've talked about, but frankly, I think what we need some more input on is limited street lighting. You know, I think there could be a number of options that we could see here. You know, we've done street lighting a number of ways in the town of Barnstable. We've done a minimalist approach where we really don't do anything, right? We've taken a kind of half step where we have some utility pole lights that kind of light things up in certain locations. And then we've taken a full streetscape approach, right, where we have decorative lighting. So all kind of within the realm of possibility. Not sure what really is the most desirable option from everybody here. Something we want to seek some input on. So sidewalks, the first one. It's just a picture, and all the pictures you're going to see here are all from Google Street View because they frankly came up with some good pictures going through Google Street View. So on the left side, you know, you have the tree here, results in a pinch point of the sidewalk because there's not enough space to get by within the public right-of-way. On this side, there's a bit of a maintenance issue here, right? But there's also a runoff issue, and there's also underneath all that a diminishing condition of the sidewalk. You don't see any curb ramps in any of these locations. So, you know, that's just kind of indicative of what the corridor looks like. You know, narrow sidewalks, overall not necessarily compliant along all sections. And frankly, to meet today's standards, they should be upgraded. Crosswalk concerns. I talked about mid-block crosswalks. This is one of them. Got another one that we'll show. This is just south of the old stage intersection. Everyone's familiar with the location, I'm sure. Just two parallel bars, not overly visible, right? On either side, just grass, not ADA accessible, doesn't meet code. It's also right on the curve. So you come around this curve and you don't have a lot of time to see people in the roadway, particularly if they're coming for this direction. They're gonna not be visible till the last minute. And it's frankly in a random location. Not sure, frankly, how the crosswalk ended up in this location, but there's not necessarily a destination. There's residents on each side, and it's on a bad location. So, I mean, there's a number of considerations here that aren't necessarily great. I think with this particular location, we'd be looking to relocate it to a better spot and make it more visible. Oops. Similar situation here. Again, Centerville Historic Museum, rec building right across the street, right on a curve, not very visible, no curb ramps. Two attractions for sure, right? But probably could be moved a little further south and make it a little bit safer environment and enhanced. So those are options that we'll be looking at through this. So I'm going to preface this. These are not proposals. These are just the realm of possibilities, right? These are some of the things we've done in town to enhance crosswalks. This is on Pitcher's Way. The new Tractor Supply building's right here. And on the left is Schooner Lane, which is a residential area. There was no crosswalk here. There's a lot of people that cross with Schooner Lane. So as part of the development agreement for this, the developer was required to install this crosswalk. So you see here, it's not just two parallel bars. There's the ladder style that is an accepted visible crosswalk. It is on a bit of a curve. However, we did check the sight distance and it's at adequate sight distance given the speed limit here. And in addition, we've enhanced them with these rectangular rapid flashing beacons. So they're push button activated. If you're going to go enter the crosswalk, you push the button, it starts flashing. You can't miss it when you're driving down the street. Makes it much safer environment. Same setup here. This is on West Main Street. New Dollar General would be right about where I'm standing in this picture. Again, there was an existing crosswalk here actually, and unfortunately somebody got hit after the Dollar General was installed. Somebody got run over trying to cross because there's a number of apartment buildings and people living across the street. So we reacted relatively quickly as possible to that and installed these flashing beacons in order to alert people on West Main Street, which as everybody knows is just a big straight road that people drive fast on, to alert people that somebody's entering the roadway to try to make it more visible. Certainly something that could be considered in some of these areas. This is Route 149 in Marston's Mills, is what we did as part of the Village project in Marston's Mills. Similarly, the flashing beacons in this location, again, a mid-block crossing. There's a restaurant here, so there's an attraction. In this case, we had concrete sidewalks. That was a desire of the community in this section of town. Here we didn't do the ladders, we did kind of a stamped inlay with a brick design. Looks pretty nice. Same thing here, Marston's Mills. This is heading southbound towards 28. Everybody's familiar with the intersection there. In this case, flashing beacons, some advanced signage to tell people that there's going to be a crosswalk. Here we have a raised crosswalk, which really once you enter the roadway, makes you even more visible. And again, the stamped inlay for decorative purposes. Barnstable Village and Route 6A. In this case, we didn't put the flashing beacons in because it's straight. There's a traffic signal a couple 100 feet down the road, so it's a visible location. The flashing beacons weren't necessary and really weren't desired in this location. But here we also have the same stamp design and a raised crosswalk. In this particular project, we installed brick sidewalks because we were matching what was there previously. A little bit of a maintenance issue on our end, but frankly, it kept the character of the village, right? That's what we try to do with these type of projects. You'll see here there was an old stone wall that we had to retain. That was a design consideration as we were working through the project. You'll see a smaller tree here. We had to take a tree, replaced it with a tree. And then some street lighting. So again, these are all design considerations. This is the type of things we can do in a corridor. So obviously interested in feedback on any of these design elements. So I said I was going to talk about on-street parking. My goal is not to pick on the country store by any means. We all love the country store, right? But this is just a great picture of what I'm talking about when I talk about parking conflicts and on-street parking conflicts. We have a parked car here. We have people walking in between traffic and the parked car. It should really be the other way around. Use the car as protection from the pedestrians. And the reason that's happening is because parking is not formalized there. People are going to pull off and pull as close to the edge of the paved area as possible so their car doesn't get hit, right? By formalizing parking, you could have an area that's designated for parking and an area that's designated for pedestrians to go around the parked cars and frankly provide a safer pedestrian area. I think we're all familiar that people park on the other side of the road too when it gets busy out there. So perhaps something we need to look at is other options to expand parking if that's desirable. But those are the type of things we want to talk about tonight. Street trees. There's Andy. He's back there too, so you can all go talk to him. He's doing an assessment of one of the 30 trees along the Main Street corridor that we're talking about, right? Again, old stage from South Main Street. Two of the trees that are in poor health. They have holes in them. Coming to the end of their lifetime. Assessing this tree here. There's some growth on the bottom of it. I won't speak for Andy, but I think that kind of alludes to stress of the tree, right? So there are a number of trees out here that are in tough condition at this point. There are also some that are in great condition and look beautiful, right? So try to retain them. This is what I was alluding to earlier. I actually have stepped in this and almost broke my ankle. This is what happens when you put a tree that close to the roadway and it can't get water, right? It tries to find water, and ultimately you end up with roots in the sidewalks that are directly there, make failing sidewalks. So where there are trees that are in good health, there may be ways to design around the existing root system, raise the sidewalk up a little bit in that case to try to maintain the tree's health. Those are things we'll be looking at during the design process. But ultimately, you can't have sidewalks like that. Promise the tree survey is the tree survey. There is a figure in the back, it's in the middle on the back side. You can look at it, take a look at all the areas. But we have basically red trees are the ones that we found are in poor condition. Frankly, probably should be starting to plan removal anyway. Yellow are fair condition. They're stressed. There's some of those ones that we just showed that are stressed, but they're surviving at this point. And then the green ones are the ones that are healthy and in good shape. So just for reference, there's 10 of each of them for 30 total. Just worked out that way. Again, that figure's in the back. You can all take some time to look at that and after, and we can talk about that. Some other concerns we talked about, speed mitigation. There are a number of options for speed mitigation. Engineering it's not always possible to engineer your way through speed mitigation, but there are elements you can do. You can narrow roadways, you can install radar signs, you can install other types of infrastructure that will slow people down. We talked about the parking spaces on street that kind of pinch the roadway and make people feel like they should slow down. There are also, the town can also enact special speed regulations. Actually, it requires DOT approval. That requires a parking study. Frankly, a lot of times we do these, we find the data doesn't support a special speed regulation, but certainly something that can happen. That can basically bring the enforceable speed limit down to 25 if we find that it warrants it. We just have to go through the effort and do the studies and make sure the data supports it. Drainage improvements, talk about that. That's something we do with any project when we're kind of digging up the roadway. If the drainage is old and failing or needs to be enhanced, we'll do that. Street lighting, again, I already talked about that, but really want some input on that tonight because I frankly am not really sure where the village is on street lighting. So we're interested in some feedback on that. Don't want to go the wrong way on that particular element. And then obviously the key, preserve and enhance the historic village core character. Coordination, that's why we're hosting this event. We want to make sure that we get the input from the village and don't do something that's not desired, right? Obviously the utility projects need to happen. Particularly the sewer needs to happen, right? We're regulatorily required to do it. But how do we put it back together? And that's what we want to talk about. Improving walkability is important in a village center. Improving connectivity is a number of destinations, right? Let's make sure that we can cross a road safely to get from the museum to the rec building and vice versa. Let's make sure we can get down to the beach safely and cross the Four Seas intersection with actually being able to cross with a pedestrian button, because right now there isn't one. There's no crosswalk. So let's enhance some of these areas and make sure that we can actually utilize it right. Restoring the streetscape elements that have to be impacted by utilities. Trees, sidewalks, etc. Things that have to be impacted, let's restore them and make sure we put them back in a desirable manner. This one's me. Let's try to avoid urban design elements, right? We're trying to keep a historic character, so that's what we'll try to do with this design. A couple other locations we want to talk about. There's stations for each of these particular locations as well. Main Street at Old Stage. Really interesting intersection. So we have 4 legs of an intersection where 3 are stopped. Not really sure why. Right off the bat, I think that's something that we can do to enhance some safety here. There are some sightline issues there with some of the existing trees, so we got to get that right. But there's some thought that needs to go in behind that. But this northbound approach probably can use a stop sign to help mitigate things. There's no crosswalks. There's not really adequate curb ramps. There's not really adequate pedestrian facilities here at all. So there's some enhancement that can be done here. I don't think we need to rebuild the whole intersection, but there are some improvements that can be made to make it safer. Another interesting area is over here near the insurance building. There's some on-street parking there. The on-street parking in and of itself isn't necessarily an issue, but what is an issue is if you're trying to pull out of this road, you can't see past the parking, right? I think there's a way. We've looked at options for being able to keep the parking there as well, be able to keep the parking there but make it so that you can pull out a little further and be able to see past it with some minor geometric changes. Something we'd be looking to incorporate if desired. Trying to think if there's anything else. Nope. Next slide. So here's just a picture. We're all familiar, right? But this is the northbound approach. No stop sign, no crosswalks, narrow sidewalks. Some improvements could certainly be made here, especially if we're going to be digging up the road anyway. Again, Main Street itself, Main Street, we'll call it the Four Seas intersection. Couple things going on here. One, the traffic signal equipment, some of the oldest traffic signal equipment we have in town, it's failing, we need to replace it anyway. It also doesn't have any pedestrian facilities, so we have areas that are desirable to cross. There's no push buttons in order to make it safe for people to enter the roadway. There's no crosswalks. So in order to come from the village down to Craigville Beach, you cross the road without a crosswalk. You really don't have a safe environment to cross the road. There's some conflicts in this area between on-street parking and pedestrians, right? So it gets really tight in through here if you're trying to head eastbound with the on-street parking and with the limited sidewalk and the limited area there. I think there's some opportunities there to improve that, but something that we've identified. And then there's this slip lane that heads westbound. I'll call it a slip lane. Presents kind of conflicts when you get down here. You have to have a yielding situation, right? And as we've looked at it a number of times, we can't really figure out why it has to be there, right? And I think it presents opportunities to improve pedestrian safety by kind of narrowing distances that pedestrians need to walk, but also not having multiple areas you need to cross. So we started doing some initial design on this intersection. Well, this is the intersection, so really old traffic signal equipment, some other things going on here that we just talked about. But this is kind of what we're starting to conceptualize. Not a final proposal by any means. Look to get some input on it. It's all the way in the back near the TV. You'll be able to see this in some closer detail. But effectively, what we're thinking here is, at a minimum, we need to replace the traffic signal equipment. We need to add some pedestrian facilities. We need to add some crosswalks. So that's what's going on here. It's 2 new crosswalks in this location, some curb ramps in order to make it accessible. The kind of outside the box idea is to remove the slip lane and make it more of a conventional 4-way intersection. Interested in input on that. Add some green space there, minimizes distance that pedestrians need to cross, minimizes another crossing that wouldn't be protected by the intersection or by the pedestrian signals. So I think there's a lot of reasons to do something like that, but certainly interested in thoughts there. And then trying to find ways to add additional pedestrian area here without taking parking spaces. So we got to work through that. May need to do some realignment of the roadway, minor, some narrowing of lanes, but certainly something we want to try to do while we're in this area. And then some new sidewalks in areas where they don't exist. So that's our initial thought here, but obviously want some input on this. Mother's Park. So there's a number of things going on here from a traffic perspective and pedestrian perspective alone. And then there's the sewer aspect, so we'll take them one by one. So Mother's Park Road, this is a kind of cut-through road there that if you're trying to head east, when you're going south, you would kind of go to avoid this kind of hairpin turn, right? It's also unsafe because people just kind of speed through it, and there's yield conditions there, informal yield conditions. So it's kind of been a priority of DPW to try to get rid of that road anyway, because we see it as unsafe. However, to do that, you really need to realign the intersection because it's not geometrically correct from an engineering perspective. In addition, there's the sewer expansion project, right? And Mother's Park, the Mother's Park area is the area where a sewer pump station would need to be installed, somewhere in this corridor here. So the proposal would be to utilize Mother's Park Road for that, and I'll show you what that looks like. So as part of the proposal, Mother's Park Road is no more. This portion, the southern portion of what was Mother's Park Road, the pavement would be removed. It would be incorporated into Mother's Park. Nice flat area that will be utilized for the park use. In order to get rid of that road, the intersection would need to be realigned in that manner. One thing I didn't mention is there's really no connectivity from a pedestrian perspective. You have a sidewalk in this location on North Main, and you have a sidewalk on Finney's Lane. There's no way to get from point A to point B. So we would try to make that connection as part of this. In addition, there's really no parking in order to utilize Mother's Park. So one idea is to install some gravel parking areas in this location in order to make the park a little bit more usable. Ultimately, this would be an increase in the size of the park at the end of the day. This portion here would need to go away from the park to become part of the road. This portion here would be added. This portion here is kind of a little low point, right? This portion's a flat area that probably would be more usable at the end of the day from a park perspective. I talked about the sewer infrastructure, right? That's what this purple square is right here. Oops. So in this area here, we would propose to install what's called a submersible pump station, so a below grade pump station a vault that's below grade that the sewage comes into, and then is pumped up to Route 28 to the building that's being installed at the intersection with Finney's Lane right now. We have some renderings in the back that can kind of show what we expect that to look like. But effectively everything's below grade. You see some hatches, some concrete pads at the surface, an electrical panel and a generator. It can be screened with vegetation. So that's the proposal there. Did spend quite a bit of time talking about that a couple weeks ago at the informational session we hosted about the sewer expansion aspect of all this. And if you're interested in more information, I encourage you to watch that, or I'm happy to talk in more detail about it. Craigsville Beach Road. So this is the start of the project, right? Park City Wind's going to come on shore in this location. They're going to utilize they propose to utilize the eastern parking lot of Craigsville Beach, and then they would head north. There's some improvements that can be made along this corridor. In addition, the sewer needs to be installed from here to here as well. So the whole stretch is really part of the project from Coble's Beach all the way to the bridge. There are a number of crosswalks in the area. Again, to what we talked about before, they're on straightaways, but people drive pretty fast here. There's probably ways to enhance them, probably ways to slow people down. And there's kind of discontinuous sidewalks along the corridor. We get to about here, and then it's really just shoulder and really informal facilities. So some opportunities there to make things a little safer. In addition, the intersection with Long Beach Road, it's really kind of some strange geometry there. It's not ideal from a traffic perspective. And then you also have the entrance to Craigsville Beach right there. Looking at options to try to see if that can be enhanced in any way. Been having some conversations with our community service and rec staff about that. See how we can keep the operation similar there, but also make some traffic improvements along the way. So things we're thinking about. Obviously, again, looking for some input on this. So in summary, there's utility work scheduled to start in the spring and go through 2026. The utility work will result in impacts to the streetscape, and there are some deficiencies or potential improvements we've seen along the streetscape, right? Corridor enhancements can be incorporated in the utility work, and in fact, we plan to do that. That's what we want to talk about tonight, right? We're seeking public input as to what that should look like. What are our next steps? As I alluded to, we're going to break out into a workshop. Staff will be here as long as you need us to have conversations about any aspect of the corridor. Again, we do have questionnaires. I see a number of you with them. Encourage you to fill them out. Encourage you to provide information if you want updates. We're going to open a public comment period through May 1st. That's really just so we can get going on design after. If you have comments afterwards, let us know. We really want to get going on the design aspect of this. Based upon what we hear, we'll start compiling those comments and we'll start design efforts, and then we'll see what we come up with, and we'll have another discussion. Right, so we'll host another discussion once we have some concepts that we're ready to talk about. I'm Griffin Bowden. I'm really taking the lead on this as the town engineer. As far as the public comments go, Kelly Colopy in the back is the DPW's communication manager. Yeah, there you go. You can send an email to her to public comments. She does a good job of tracking all those things a lot better than me. So she'll be the point of contact for public comments or information. And this material will all be on the Barnstable Water Resources website, so it can be accessed. Sarah's filming it. You can watch this all again if you'd like to. And with that, we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and then we'll set up and start having conversations.
Officer Troy Perry's here. He's the traffic division supervisor. He has data related to speeds on Main Street. So if you have any questions about that, we'll make sure he's available to answer any questions you might have about speeds and things of that nature on Main Street in the area.
Thank you, Councilor. So we're not going to do a formal question and answer. We'll be available throughout, but if you have a question about the questionnaire.
If we want to give some thought to this and send this in, can we email this?
Absolutely.
Or if we,
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't have to collect it tonight. It can come in after the fact. Yep, for sure. So again, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We have some food, coffee, water. Enjoy yourself. We'll be here for as long as we need to.